Welcome to the Road Home podcast with Ethan Nichtern. Join Ethan as he and his guests explore the Buddhist path as it relates to art, culture, activism, politics, Western psychology, and more. If you'd like to support Ethan's podcast, please visit BeHereNowNetwork.com/Ethan.
All right. So, hi, everybody. This is Ethan Nichtern. Welcome to the Road Home podcast. I'm super excited to be here with a major Buddhist activist, I could say. Shannon Watts is the founder of Moms Demand Action and author of the book Fight Like a Mother, among other things. So, we follow each other on Twitter. But it's so great to be in conversation with you. So, Shannon, welcome to the Road Home podcast.
Thank you for having me. I listen to your podcast regularly, and I love it.
So, the question, I need a better first question, but when the guest is somebody who has a practice or studies or practices Buddhism or meditation, I usually ask how they got into meditation first. And I believe that happened before you founded Moms Demand Action, right?
That's right. So I would say almost between 15 and 10 years ago. I think in some cases, yoga is a gateway drug, right, to Buddhism and mindfulness and other practices. And that's how it was for me. I was raised by a very conservatively Catholic dad who actually went into the seminary to be a priest when he was 13. One of 5 Catholic boys, one of them had to do it, and it was him. And so, he had me going to Mass and to catechism and to Catholic schools my whole life. And this is not to denigrate Catholicism, because my family is Catholic, and I understand that it's a very profound religious experience for many people. It was never that for me. I mean, I just found no solace in it. And then when I started studying Buddhism, it felt like home. Like, oh, this is actually, these are lessons that help you live a more fulfilling life with less suffering. Like, this is exactly what I want and need. And I had spent so much time studying and practicing. And I say so much time, I just mean in a concentrated period, because it wasn't that long afterward that Moms Demand Action sort of took my life over. And it's obviously hard to spend that much time immersed in studying and practicing when you are a full-time volunteer. And I would say, one thing I look forward to in the future is being able to get back to immersing myself in that.
Okay. And so Moms Demand Action, the seminal event for that was the Sandy Hook massacre. Is that right?
Sorry. I got that off, but my kids' calls come through.
No worries.
So I had been in the corporate world for about 15 years in corporate communications. And then I was taking about 5 years off. I was blending my family with my husband's family. We have 5 kids together, all told. And so I thought, I'm going to take a 5-year respite and then go back to work. And what happened at the very end of that 5 years was that I was in my home, and at the time I lived in Indiana, and I was watching the news, and the news of the active shooter in Newtown, Connecticut started to break. And I was so profoundly devastated, as so many Americans were that day. But then I got really angry because I was seeing politicians and pundits on TV saying the solution was somehow more guns, like right after this had happened. And I knew nothing about organizing or gun violence or even, the legislative system. But I knew that was a lie. I knew that our system was broken and that I needed and wanted to get involved. And the next thing I did was to start a Facebook page, and that has turned into what is now Moms Demand Action.
The next thing I did was start a Facebook page, but there's a lot of steps in between that. I mean, Moms Demand Action has become, it's basically one of the biggest, issue-driven activist groups that exist, isn't it?
It is. So, what I thought in those hours after the shooting was going to be like an online conversation with other moms and women. And I always say, I had 75 Facebook friends, so I don't know who I thought I was going to talk to, but it was very much like lightning in a bottle that women and moms saw my Facebook page and then just started sharing it, and it just blew up. And because all of my information was public, I never imagined I'd be a public figure. These women started, if you know anything about type A women and moms, like they just started calling me and emailing me. and like even texting me and saying, I live in Texas. I want to do this, not really any of us knowing what this was, where I live. And then we used Facebook to create Facebook pages for every state. We started organizing in private groups and having conversations. And within weeks, we started spending all of our time working on federal legislation. It was called the Manchin-Toomey bill. It was a bipartisan bill that would have required a background check on every gun sale, right? It would have closed that federal loophole in honor of the Sandy Hook tragedy. And I think we all thought, okay, that will certainly pass. There's no way that won't pass. And then we'll have spent, 6 months max of our lives, and we'll kind of go back to what we were doing before. And I can remember sitting in the Senate gallery when it failed by just a handful of votes in the Senate, including some Democratic senators who voted against it. And we have very sophisticated, brilliant volunteers who said, well, let's pivot and start doing this work in state houses and in boardrooms where we live. Kind of like marriage equality, right? You have to build that momentum on the ground. And so that's what we've been doing now for almost 8 years. And you're right. Not only are we one of, if not the largest grassroots movement in the country, we're also now even larger than the NRA.
So I saw an interview when your book came out around, and you talked about this question, and I think it was an interview with Mother Jones. So the identity of the mother, like why other than it being a group of maybe type A people who can get shit done, why is the identity of motherhood so important to the movement?
It's a really interesting question, and I've had a lot of conversations about this, and it is a double-edged sword in some ways. You shouldn't have to be a woman or specifically a mom to be angry and to demand action and change and to get it. And yet, if you look at the system and the way we're made up right now, women only hold about 25% of the 500,000 elected positions in this country. And we're less than 5% of Fortune 1000 CEOs. So we're not in a position of power to make these changes in that traditional way. So what levers of power do we have to pull? Well, first of all, we make about 80% of the spending decisions for our families. We make up the majority of the voting population. And frankly, men are terrified to have women on the wrong side of them when they're lawmakers, right? When we show up in the dozens or hundreds in our red shirts, it's truly frightening for them in a good way. And so those are some of the levers of power that we could pull. And we realized that right away. And that has been really, if you look all the way back to Prohibition, which is when women were allowed to get involved in activism in this country because temperance was seen as a Christian value. They were never able to put that genie back in the bottle because women wanted to be activists and wanted to be empowered. And so, all the way from child labor laws up to the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, it has been often women and moms leading the way. I hope that my daughters or my daughter's daughters will have positions of power so that, they don't have to be moms to men action. But we have to be pragmatic with where we are right now. And truly by using the cultural power of being a mom, and I think in many ways flipping it on its head, right? We're not these women who are necessarily baking cookies and as what does Donald Trump call them, like suburban housewives. We are like badasses who are wielding the power that we have to force change.
It's a term, nasty women, right?
Right, nasty women, and proud of it. And I think that's also an important cultural change. I mean, if you look at, for example, the Wall of Moms in Portland, those are badass women who are taking on, a really dangerous situation and winning in it. So again, there you can see it from all different sides, and I understand that, but I also think it's important to be pragmatic.
I was thinking of it. Maybe you talked a lot about the mom issue, that it's kind of a limiting factor, or it's like over identifying one group of people. But I was also thinking about it in terms of kind of the spiritual dimension of like the mother lineage, in some like tantric Buddhist traditions or indigenous traditions, or like I was thinking about that in terms of after the George Floyd killing, there was a murder this summer. There was a meme that went around that when he called out for mama, he summoned all the mothers, so that there's some kind of spiritual potency to that embodiment that's like the protector, sometimes wrathful, sometimes nurturing quality of like call us in when society's in trouble, as it is right now.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think where you come up against something that is in some ways uniquely American, it's this idea of, well, who is a mom? And so often, like I was saying, Donald Trump calling women suburban housewives, right? That's a dog whistle for white women. And look, I am a suburban white woman who got off the sidelines because I was afraid my kids weren't safe in their schools. And what I came to realize, along with all of our other volunteers, is that mass shootings and school shootings are about 1% of the gun violence in this country. It's really the daily gun violence, whether it's, in cities or in rural communities, whether it's homicides or domestic gun violence or unintentional shootings or gun suicides, which is a horrible crisis in this country. All of it matters. All of it has to be addressed. And that includes police violence, right? Police violence is gun violence. And so I think all of those things that we're talking about come into play when you talk about who and what is a mom and what is a mother. I am very proud of the fact that we're now mothers and others, right? I see a lot of men wearing Moms Demand Action shirts and really allowing women to lead and being willing to follow and support. And that makes me immensely proud. And we also now have Students Demand Action too.
So the other thing is like what you're taking on here, directly taking on the NRA. Like there's a fair number and a growing number. I'm in the Trump era of like mindfulness practitioners, wellness practitioners, although it's been really scary recently to see the inroads that QAnon has made into certain wellness spaces. But there's a lot of examples over the past number of years of like people who have a mindfulness approach or a Buddhist approach taking on a social issue, such a lot of it is environmental or et cetera. So you come up against these things, big corporate interests or big oil, et cetera, but you are taking on directly people with guns and a lot of times like not very educated people with guns. So was there any fear on your part at being like taking on people who have assault rifles?
Well, so first of all, I should point out that I was very naive when I started Moms Demand Action. There was this underbelly of America that I just didn't know existed, right? So I started getting texts and calls and emails and people driving by my home and threatening, physical and sexual violence to me, to my daughters right away. And that was certainly not something that I expected. But the other thing was, I think Moms Demand Action has really made open carry part of the American vernacular because not a lot of people realized that it's legal and largely unregulated in 41 states in this country. This idea that you can go out in public, with a loaded semi-automatic rifle to intimidate and silence people. And we started seeing that right away at marches and rallies. The gun extremists really doubled down when Moms Demand Action came on the scene. I frankly think it was the NRA's worst nightmare that women and mothers would organize against them. And that has come true. It really was their worst nightmare because we've been so effective. And I think these gun extremists hope that they can silence or intimidate us, just like we're seeing them do right now at state houses and at protests and rallies. And it didn't work. But what it did do was provide us with a lot of photos to show America, like, this is the logical outcome and consequence of allowing gun lobbyists to write our gun laws.
So, but like I have a daughter, she's 3. But what is that moment like in your mind where it's like, oh, I started this thing as a Facebook page because I really cared about this issue, and now I'm getting death threats, or my daughters are getting threats.
It was terrifying. I mean, I can remember I got this one letter in the mail. It was like Son of Sam, where someone had cut all these letters, out of a magazine and put this threatening letter together to me, and obviously knew my home address. And early on, I had to make a decision. Like, am I gonna back down, or am I gonna double down? And I think that my personality is such that it made me more angry than it did scared. And so many of our volunteers, look, they receive threats. They've experienced this same kind of open carry intimidation. And most of them have said, if I lose my children, I have nothing left to lose. So I'm going to fight this fight. I know I'm on the right side of history, and I'm going to let these threats, and a lot of it is online, right? A lot of it is just trolling. It's going to become background noise so that I can focus on getting the work done. And that's really what we've been doing now for 8 years, is just saying, the threats and the intimidation is not going to slow us down.
I wonder, so an issue I face a lot, I mean, there's a lot of, I've really taken this approach being a Buddhist student and teacher, that the notion that I'm supposed to stay neutral in different social or political issues, I think is a false interpretation of the teachings. The best I can, and also there is no interpretation of ancient Buddhist teachings in a democracy, because they didn't actually exist in a democracy. So we're kind of on our own to figure out. But I feel like it's my job to just sort of transparently narrate how I'm thinking about issues and what I think the most important things are, and to try to practice, compassionate speech, et cetera. I get a fair amount of pushback. I mean, I get different kinds of pushback, which is interesting from different groups. I'm sure you get different kinds of, when you look at people who are more conservative versus people who are more progressive, like how you get critiqued, et cetera. But part of the pushback I get is like, shouldn't we spend more time as Buddhists, like trying to understand, the mindset, or, if you're saying the Republican Party needs to die, which is my belief, I don't think the people in it need to die. When I think of somebody like Ted Cruz, who I wrote about because he's a big Princess Bride fan, which is weird and scary to me. I say, may you be happily unemployed.
I like that.
So, do you get pushback, like, we need to understand these people, we need to understand Trump supporters, we need to understand why somebody feels like they need to open carry an assault rifle into, a target or something, like, and how do you answer that? Like, where is the role of compassion for those that you disagree with in all this?
Such a fascinating question. And it brings up so many different issues. I mean, the first thing I want to point out is that 90% of Americans, 80% of gun owners, and 74% of NRA members, based on polling, support common sense gun laws like a background check on every gun sale. So this is not polarizing among the American public. It's really been polarizing within state legislatures and in Congress. That said, there is this minority of gun extremists, but they're a very vocal minority, who believe any law whatsoever is a slippery slope to undoing the Second Amendment and confiscating everyone's guns. And those are the people who show up, with AR-15s, for example, like they were in Michigan recently, and as a result, lawmakers were having to wear bulletproof vests. I don't have a lot of compassion for that. What I think is that we need to make sure the 90% of Americans who support us are voting on this issue, as opposed to allowing this vocal minority that is endangering us set the agenda. But I think, the question about compassion is an important one. I mean, it's hard to be neutral when you're angry. And when 100 Americans are dying every day from senseless, preventable gun violence, that makes me very angry. And anger can either be a poison that is pointed inward or outward and hurtful and ruinous, or it can be a motivator, as long as you're channeling it, I think, in the right way. And so certainly I try to have compassion, and you will, I hope that you see that on social media, I try to be kind, and I would never engage in an ad hominem attack. I would never mock the way gun extremists look. And, it is important to remember that, who you are online is who you are in real life too. But I hope that for the most part, I'm able to use my anger to foment change and not suffering.
But it's also in those those critiques, there also seems to be like it's a question like, is compassion the only Buddhist teaching? Because there's also this questioning, and it seems like we're all waking up to this, or more of us are waking up to, like, how does power actually work? Like when you said that only 25% of elected officials are women, I imagine that that's an all-time high too, that's the best
Yes.
it's ever been. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, is that's weird that 51% of people are women and 25% of elected officials, or was it 5% of Fortune
5%, less than 5% of Fortune 1000 CEOs and 25% of lawmakers.
Right. So like the notion of, it's weird to ask, like, I always think, like, what does compassion mean for somebody who has a lot more power than you, and why is that where the discussion goes, in a certain way? And so that's always an interesting, I guess I wanted to shift because, so if we updated this, like, is it true that the NRA is kind of on the point of ruin right now? They're down in the fight at the very least. Like, if this were fights are not good analogies for beating violent entities, but
they're weaker than they've ever been, and simultaneously our movement is stronger than it's ever been. The NRA spent tens of millions of dollars in the 2016 election, at least $30 million to help elect Donald Trump. And that has translated into absolutely no priority legislation being passed for their organization, because we've gotten so good at playing defense. In fact, until the coronavirus crisis, gun sales were in the hole. I mean, they were down about $100 million plus. This so-called nonprofit, is being investigated for misspending its members' dollars through, six-figure Italian suits for its leader, and private jet travel and sweetheart deals for friends and family, right? Not the way a nonprofit organization would typically act, and appears to be incredibly corrupt and possibly in large trouble. And so I don't think the NRA will ever be down and out. If you look at Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which started in the 80s, they're still showing up in state houses and in DC to protect the wins that they've made, because special interests are just part of the system, at least right now. But if we can win in November, right, elect a gun sense president, flip the Senate, hold the House, change the makeup of state legislatures, then we can continue to make sure the NRA doesn't gain any power back, but in fact, even loses more power, because we will be in a position to pass all the laws that they oppose at a federal level, and then in state legislatures too.
So I guess that I wanted to get your advice for people who are, practitioners. Like, there's the short term. So when people hear this, there'll be about 5 weeks until, although people are already voting right now, but 5 weeks until the last day you can vote, November 3rd. So there's the short term. Like, what are you focusing on leading up to November 3rd? And then what do you think you're going to be focusing on what should people focus on there's a real template here of how you organize energy and create a sangha, for lack of a better word, around something that can grow very big and have like a massive positive impact, right? So I wanted to just spend our last like 15 or so minutes together picking your brain about like, what should people be doing? Because a lot of people I know are just freaking out and like thinking.
Well, as I've seen you tweet, the antidote to freaking out is to act. And I know none of us expected to be doing this work leading up to an election during a pandemic. But the interesting thing that I have found in the last 6 months is that the technology that we've invested in, we started as a Facebook page, and we've always been online in many ways and using technology and apps and relational organizing, essentially, ways to dip into your peer group and to get them to act. And so I'm so grateful for that, because here we are. We didn't miss a beat, even though there was a global pandemic. We moved everything online. And I think this technology enables us to be even more inclusive and more equitable in our work. When the pandemic hit, we were just about to have an advocacy day where everyone shows up at a state house. We do this throughout the year in all the states, and we were about to have one where I live in California. We had record RSVPs, and at the last minute, we had to take it online and do it virtually, which we had never done before. And it ended up way more people participated. And it's not that easy to get, for example, from San Diego to Sacramento, right? So people could take a half hour out of their lunch break or during the day to join a Zoom call with their lawmakers. And so I don't think we'll ever go back to the old way of doing things. I think that this technology will be part of everything we do now. But even though we're not ringing physical doorbells, we can ring digital doorbells. And we have technology at our organization where people can reach out to their peer groups through texting technology. We have calling technology that allows you not only to call people in your own state, but in other states, right? So you may live in a state with great gun laws and representation, but you want to, for example, call into a battleground state like Texas, where we just need to flip 9 seats in the state house to have what we call a gun sense majority. And so I would just, back to your original point, I think it's just important to act and to get off the sidelines. And you should be wearing out your voice, making calls. You should be wearing out your battery, sending texts. And you should make it a point every day to ask at least, 5 people that you know if they are registered to vote and if they have a plan to vote.
Yeah. What do you do when somebody tells you they're apolitical?
I don't know if I've met that many people since 2016 that say that.
It's a smaller group for sure.
I think what I encounter more are people who are scared isn't the right word, but they're trepidatious about expressing their opinion publicly or getting online and getting out the vote in that way, because there are trolls and because you can get blowback. But I don't think that's a luxury that any of us have anymore. There's so much disinformation out there that we all sort of have an obligation to correct it. And one important way to do that is online, especially during a pandemic.
Mm. Yeah, the disinformation part is scary. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but Social Dilemma, the Netflix documentary
I haven't
about
seen that yet.
It's worth watching. It's probably not anything you didn't know, but especially Facebook is clearly by far the worst actor, but how the monetization leads them to basically sell their users to negative interests, basically, and then leads you to living in basically bubbles of disinformation. Yep. Is pretty scary. So I've also been thinking if maybe alternative social media platforms will come out of these, more progressive social movements. So yeah, so what do you say? So that was the apolitical question. The other question I get, which annoys me, but I get it so much from people I care about. Sharon Salzberg actually had the best answer to this, but what do you say if somebody says, there's not that much difference between the Republicans and the Democrats, like somebody who says Joe Biden is basically like slightly to the left of George W. Bush,
Well, look, this is the most important election of our lifetimes and maybe in our nation's history, because Donald Trump has proven to be such a dangerous leader. And clearly, as I always say, a sociopath of limited intelligence. And I'm not sure how you can make the argument that they're both the same and the system sucks, so you're not going to get involved, right? Because our planet is at stake. Lives are at stake. The future of democracy, I think, is at stake. And I just think, that is such a bogus argument. And it's also so privileged, because if you have enough wealth and autonomy that you don't have to worry about the outcome of this election and its impact on marginalized people, Black and brown people, women, to me, it's offensive.
But
Here's the answer. I'm sure it's much more zen.
No. It's similar to your answer. It just plays with language well. She said that somebody said, the difference between the two parties is marginal, and her answer was, well, millions of people live in those margins. So, I like that answer too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, but at the same time, I get spiritually what, especially kind of younger, because it's interesting to watch yourself. I'm 42 now, to watch yourself get older and the ways you see that there is a pull to be not more conservative, but in certain areas of life, like you're like, okay, I pay a mortgage now. Like I own an apartment in New York City, which is insane. I never thought that was going to happen. And so you say like, okay, I have to deal with those details. But I think there's also maybe in that kind of a loss of a disappointment on the part of some progressives that there's like a compromise of vision, that the vision isn't leading, that there's not a sense of like, let's just talk about the world that we want to see. Let's talk about like a more compassionate world, and then maybe talk about how do we get there rather than start with the compromise.
Yeah, incrementalism has become a dirty word in many ways, and yet it's incrementalism that has always led to revolutions. When you get involved in an issue like this, you don't expect it to change overnight. Do I wish it could? Yes. But it's not the system that we're operating in. And the way you change the system is to vote and to change the people that make it up. But I call what our volunteers do the unglamorous heavy lifting of activism, right? It isn't just creating strategy and doing media interviews. It's making snacks and setting up chairs, and it's having meetings and signing people in, right? That's all part of activism. And it is what has, in 8 years, led us to passing so many good gun laws in state houses, beating the NRA's agenda back 90% of the time in state houses for the last 5 years, changing the open carry policies at dozens of restaurants and retailers, right? It didn't happen overnight. And if our volunteers had given up because it felt too incremental, we wouldn't be where we are now, which is on the precipice of hopefully having a lot of really strong federal laws go into place. So I get frustrated when people act like, well, if I can't change the system overnight, I'm just not going to do the work.
Yeah. It's it is frustrating, but I also understand, since I always try to understand multiple perspectives, I also understand the frustration of being asked to compromise when you want to be inspired by a vision.
I do. And I don't, the system is also set up for compromise. Whether you like the system or not, you have to change the system in certain ways. But I don't think you have to compromise your vision. I think sometimes you have to be realistic about the timeline.
Well, this has only been 8 years.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's really interesting. That's a short period of time or a long period. I think we're finding that out in the pandemic, that time has this like weird accordion quality where it looks very...
Yeah. We've stopped in our house. We stopped calling it the weekend and just day 6 and 7.
That's good that you can even keep track that way. So what is Shannon, let's say that, it's things go well and it's on the sensible gun usage front, and good legislation is passed next year, and more state legislatures are controlled by the party that still believes in democracy, and do you say, okay, I'm out, I'm gonna like just be myself and relax, or does Shannon say, okay, now I got to go work on climate change or advocacy, or what? Because I could easily see Mom's Demand just becoming like the climate change.
I think a few things. One is, I think we have been incredibly successful because we've been singularly focused. And certainly we've had groups and leaders come to us and say, hey, could you wear those shirts for this issue too? And because we've never compromised, I think that's why we've made so much progress so quickly. I thought I was going to go back to my normal life in like 2013, and it'll be 8 years, that I've been doing this work at the end of this year. And I am hopeful that work I thought would take 6 months will be done now in 2021. I'm really hopeful. I am a very type A Buddhist, so I vacillate between, okay, should I run for office? Mm-hmm. What is next? And I think about that a lot. And I also think about, it's important also to sit and think and manifest and wait and be patient and all of those things, which is not my strength. So, I'm not sure. I need to get through this election and see things like background checks be signed into law at a federal level and figure that out after that happens.
Yeah. The next question would always be, well, do you want to run for office?
I have thought about it a lot. And first of all, I have been so gratified by the amount of Moms Demand Action volunteers who have moved from not just shaping policy to making it, right? Every election cycle. In fact, this election cycle, 100 volunteers are running up and down the ballot across the country. And I'm incredibly proud of that. The fact that Lucy McBath, who was a Moms Demand Action volunteer in Georgia, is now their congresswoman is shocking to me.
And you said that's Newt Gingrich's old
congressional seat. A Republican seat for 30 years, and she won it really on this issue of gun safety. But the more I watch what has happened since Donald Trump is elected, I have to say the more pull I feel to maybe also move from not just shaping policy, but to making it.
Well, that sounds awesome. I know we have to wrap up, but I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time and being on the podcast and being such a cool example of a Buddhist who's literally putting lotus flowers into guns. That's the image that I have.
Well, thank you. And I think it's so important to talk about issues like this in other contexts. And this is an important one. It is important to talk about it in the context of compassion and kindness and reducing suffering, because I do think that's a big part of why we do this work.
Okay, so I just wanted to give a final shout out to Moms Demand Action, and Shannon Watts' book is called Fight Like a Mother, came out last year. You're not working on another book, are you?
No, not yet.
I'm just asking you about your future plans. But Fight Like a Mother, and please come back and be on the podcast anytime you want.
I would love to. And then, post COVID, I'll come listen to you give a Dharma talk.
Oh gosh, if there is I can't wait till things are happening in real life again, IRL, as the kids say.
Exactly.
Okay, so thank you so much, Shannon Watts, and for the Road Home podcast, this is Ethan Nichtern, and see you next time.